Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. My guest today is Lane County Commissioner Joe Berney. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Good to be here.
This is the first ever live stream broadcast on Facebook Live, broadcast on YouTube Live, and I also have it being broadcast on the 541 Community Facebook group, which is super exciting because it allows people a chance to comment and kind of become more interactive with the show. If you're listening to this or watching this, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and wherever you're consuming this. Joe Berney, thank you so much for doing this.
Totally my pleasure. What are you talking about?
So today I'm joined by an elected official who is seeking re-election to continue the work he is doing to serve the Springfield community. The last time I had you on was in January, and we had talked about how you had helped a young entrepreneur start his destiny as a business owner with a video game store. Now fast forward 5 months, and it's go time in this election. This is the campaign final stretch, and we're just going to start out. I want to talk to you about what these last couple of weeks have looked like.
Lots and lots of media, lots of interviews, lots of questions and answers. It's been a heck of a pace, and it will continue for another, 10 days or something like that?
Yeah, how is this different than the last time you ran? Now, you ran against Sid Lieken, who is, a pretty prominent politician in our community. But how is this one different than the last time around?
Well, running against Liken, I was a total underdog. Nobody knew me. It was a strong upset. Back then, everybody that was a political observer or plugged in the community told me that my chances were slim to none, and just walked out the door. This time, and Commissioner Liken was lazy. He was. I think that's why we won. He was very politically ambitious. He was always running for other things, and he sort of felt entitled to this position. This time I'm running against a guy that's not burdened with the truth, that is the most unchristian-like Christian minister I've ever heard of, that is sort of the extreme right has coalesced around him to get their seat that they feel entitled to back. So you're going to see large corporate structures, big money, dark money, and in my campaign, you're seeing the little guy represented. So you'll see a lot of associations, a lot of organized working groups, people that represent real people as opposed to corporate interests. Right. It's a tougher campaign. He's very aggressive. He'll say whatever it takes to win. And he's out there doing his thing.
Yeah, so, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the misrepresentations of your record. I know that when a campaign gets really tense and it's so close that it's going to get kind of ugly. So I watched the Springfield City Club forum, which, if anybody's unaware, those Springfield City Club, the forums are great, and it's a great opportunity for people to get to know candidates in some of these smaller races. Lane County Commissioner is not a small seat. It's just a lot of times Congress and governor will overshadow the coverage, and so the Springfield City Club is doing some great forums. And I was watching one that you did with David Lovell, and he was pretty clear that he's against, for example, mail-in voting, and he showed very little understanding or even a willingness to learn about ranked choice voting. What are your thoughts on mail-in voting and ranked choice voting?
Well, obviously, I support mail-in voting. I support any mechanism to allow everyone to express their sacred right to vote free from the persecution of anyone for any reason. So I obviously support that. And ranked choice, interestingly, I'm one of the few people I know that also supports that. I don't think it's as critical in an election such as this where there's only two candidates. But look at the governor's race. It's crazy. There's something like 37 candidates. And what ranked choice voting does is it's a mechanism to get big money out of political elections and to spend a hell of a lot less time politicians blasting the airwaves, which honestly I think is a distraction from getting on with life.
Right. So one of his top priorities, and this is pretty alarming to me. So one of his top priorities, he said, is to address, we're going to talk about housing for a second here. And one of the things that he said is that he is wellness first, housing earned. And I know he's not here to answer for that, but I think it's pretty clear that what he's implying is that he would be against the housing first model to address houselessness. So this is a two-part question. Are you for housing first? And what are some ways we can address houselessness? And also, I want to say for anybody listening, if they're unaware, I was unaware. Housing first, what it means is that if there's people that have found themselves without a home, that we're going to try to get them into a home first, and then we're going to deal with what got them homeless. And so I kind of want to hear what you have to say about it, but I think that this is extremely troubling, the wellness first and housing earned model, because it seems kind of, there's no empathy.
It's nonsense. It doesn't work. All data demonstrates that. It works for some people, like at the Eugene Mission. There are people that works for. But let's understand the notion of wellness first, housing earned is code for high barrier shelter only. And data demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt, and this county also, is that you got to meet people where they are. You got to provide shelter. And just because someone might have some behavioral issues, mental health issues, even addiction issues, whatever the issues are, that doesn't mean you don't treat them as a human being and try and shelter them from the elements. That's nonsense. The other thing that he has said, he talks out of both sides of his mouth. The other thing that he's said is that multiple times that we have a toxic charity arena, and he's putting down the nonprofits like St. Vincent de Paul, like Relief Nursery, like Catholic Community Services, like Lane Shelter. The list goes on and on of nonprofits that the county partners with and provides dollars to provide housing, shelter, and wraparound services to those in need based upon their need. So this housing, wellness first, housing earned is not. It's just a nonsensical extreme right code. It doesn't meet people where they are. And frankly, under my direction right now and other commissioners, that's exactly the opposite of what we're doing. We're looking for a place for a behavioral health center. We're working with the sheriff's department for a crisis center to deal with crises as they're occurring, as opposed to putting people in jail right away. It flies in the face of the philosophy of our public safety sector and our public health sector. It's nonsense.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a nonpartisan seat. I'm not secret about my biases. I'm a Democrat, and the reason that I became a Democrat is because, though I don't think that there's necessarily the answer, I think that that's the party that shows more empathy, and I watched that forum and seeing the reaction. He was literally talking about the way that you deal with how homelessness is policing. Like, that's the answer.
That is correct.
Is policing,
Yep.
And I mean, and he literally said that he would, hopefully we could get the people help that need it. And then if they can't, that they'll move on. Like, the problem will just go away. That's not a strategy, And so it's the number one issue in Lane County, and it's not even close, is homelessness. And to a lot of people, their reaction to it is the inconvenience and the eyesore, not about helping the individuals. And I think that David Lovell is an example of that.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if I may, I agree with you, but it's just rhetoric. That's all it is. Now, versus, we need to also start talking about creating a new generation of starter homes for young people and families that are renting right now. And every day that they're renting and saving money for a down payment, the reality of owning their own home is getting further and further away from them because of the insanity of the current housing market. There are ways to do that. There are ways to partner with home builders, with local financial institutions, with county provided land, with this new middle housing zoning. We're in Springfield, for example. We're looking at 2,500 square foot lots as options to put smaller homes so families actually can get into something. That's a piece of it. Another piece of it is keeping our elderly, which I am one of now, are keeping our elderly in their homes for as long as they choose. The patrician, which I was able to save for 86 families, is just an example of that. There are so many, and developing more publicly supported housing. Right now, Homes for Good, which I'm on the board of, we've purchased and own 2 properties in Glenwood, which are zoned for another 150 units of working family and elderly housing. I mean, if we're going to deal with the problem, let's deal with it substantively not rhetorically. And that's my issue with his statements.
Yeah, and then in your closing statements, this is a tough one because if it's so, it needs to be articulated well to show it's about religion, it's about faith, and how it's used as a weapon, by a lot of people on the right. I think you were really good in it. You had shared it. I wish I had it right in front of me. I don't. But in your
Yeah.
closing statement, you had talked kind of, and I may be paraphrasing a little, and you can speak on exactly what you said. But you had said, "Hey, I don't believe that you have a monopoly on righteousness."
Right.
Because a lot of times candidates will talk about it like as if they're the only person, first of all, that believes in God or is a Christian. And then second of all, that even matters, because we live in a country that is based on religious freedom. And so I want to hear what your thoughts on that, how the campaigns this time around specifically against your candidacy is somehow that this guy is more righteous. What is your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that the righteous are not always right.
Yeah.
My thoughts are that there are two sacred principles in our democracy. One is the freedom to worship in your God in any way you choose. I firmly believe that you don't. My opponent does this. He wears a neon sign on his sleeve or his chest that says, "I believe in God. I'm more righteous than you." And personally, I find it offensive.
It literally says that?
No, but that's essentially what the message is.
Yeah.
And I personally believe that every one of us that carries our God in our hearts for guidance and for comfort, not for petty political advantage. I just find that offensive and disturbing because this country is founded upon religious freedom and religious tolerance. That's a part of what it's founded on. That's a sacred principle here, without fear of reprisal or retribution from anyone that doesn't share your belief. And the second thing that was really offensive to me is there's a principle that you can vote your conscience, and your vote is something that people can't scare you out of or frighten you out of, or etc. And the whole notion to be against the universal access of voting by all of us, which mail-in voting in Oregon does provide, it's unfathomable to me. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I want to say this real quick. I want to apologize if there's an echo. I'm getting some comments that there's a little bit of an echo. This is the first stream, so we're going to work out some kinks. So I appreciate everybody listening that's going to kind of deal with it, because what's being said is super important and needs to be heard. So
I hear the echo too, for what it's worth.
Yeah, we'll work out the technicals, but hey, I just appreciate you doing this. I even forgot to start my audio version. Hey, we're working through this. No, the mail-in thing was really startling to me because I just don't understand. It's so popular in Oregon, and this rhetoric that David Lovell was saying about, oh, I think the community really is beneficial from getting together to vote. And it's like, there's so many reasons that mail-in is better. You can sit down, you can take your time, the voters pamphlet wasn't even printed last time around. Fortunately, it was this time, and you can go online and you can find all kinds of information. And so I'm such a huge supporter of mail-in voting that I was pretty alarmed when he had said that.
I was surprised too, because mail-in voting is not only is it popular, but it's more secure. It's much easier to fraudulently vote if you're not doing it mail-in in Oregon. So there are a number of things that have startled me. There's another thing that's pretty topical right now, and that's the leak of the Supreme Court decision to go back after 49 years of Roe versus Wade. And I was reading an interesting article about, first of all, the vast majority of Oregonians, Republican and Democrat, are pro-choice, at least pro-choice in the first 4 months, right, of pregnancy. And I kind of fit into that. But to have my opponent robocall people and tell them that I am for abortion into the 9th month of pregnancy is not only, again, it's absurd and it's offensive.
Yeah.
I don't know what to call that other than a lie. I really do.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. And this has been used for decades. I remember my whole entire life that this has been something that's been weaponized and whatnot, because nobody's pro-abortion, period. I mean,
Yeah,
that's,
exactly. I mean, we're
and
Catholic. Give me a
I'm
break.
I'm glad that I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's been something that I haven't addressed a lot personally on social media, only because I think it's time to listen to women, and I think that it's time men do need to speak up and speak out against what potentially could be happening. But I think that there's just a lot of strong voiced women that I think it's time to, not time, it's been time that we need to listen to them. Like
It's been
Doyle Canning
time.
says, can't wait. We can't wait, and
It's time to listen to everyone.
absolutely.
So, and anyway,
That's what feminism is. Feminism is about equality, and that's what people, they use these words. I grew up in a household. My father is extremely conservative. He's coming around to where he wants to lower the temperature. He's talking about liking Betsy Johnson, which is a step, it's a step in the right direction. But anyways, he listened to Rush Limbaugh when I was a kid, and the word liberal itself was a bad word, and I'm like, I don't know. But
well, I'm a little older than you.
3 months.
And yeah, by 3 months, right? And the whole partisanship now was not something that we grew up with. We didn't have family fights over whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, over whether you were conservative or liberal. The discussions were more substantive over how do you solve problems? What's the most pragmatic and fiscally responsible and sustainable way to solve problems, whether the problem is homelessness, whether the problem is environment, whether the problem is developing more robust business opportunities with good wages and benefits for people. Whatever the issue is, this whole hyper partisanship that we're living in now is totally used by politicians for their advantage. That's the reason they're doing it, and I find that quite distasteful.
Yeah, I've said it for a long time that there's a difference in opinion on strategy in American politics, and outside of that, people are just being jerks. Like we can debate the difference of opinion on what strategy is effective. You know what I'm saying? But outside of that, it's just all rhetoric. So go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'm
okay.
Sorry.
So I want to move on and talk about a little bit about the ceta board. You sit on the ceta board. ceta is the Springfield Economic Development Agency. And really the reason I wanted to bring this up was because I want to talk about David Lovell is the owner, property manager of a bunch of the businesses downtown Springfield.
Correct.
And I want to see if tell me first of all what ceta does. So the way that I've understood it is that they basically allot funds for like lighting and potentially murals and the decor and decoration of downtown. Is that correct?
Not quite. That might be what they've been doing, but that's not. First of all, ceta, Springfield Economic Development Agency, the board of it are all of the members of the Springfield City Council and the Springfield County Commissioner, myself right now. And it oversees what are urban renewal districts in Springfield, which really compose of downtown Springfield and the Glenwood area. And it establishes, it gets technical, but the bottom line is it establishes dollars from the increase in property values in those areas to reinvest into economic development, to create jobs, to create more business, to create, a stronger economy in those areas. Those areas are also designated as federal opportunity zones, which is another big deal because there are funds, which are opportunity zone funds, that are ripe for investing in those areas because there are tax advantages for them to do so. So that's what ceta, and ceta oversees strategic investments to increase business, to increase housing, and to increase tax revenues from business in that area.
And do you think that I hope that you win, but if David Lovell is successful and wins this seat, would it be a conflict of interest, with the businesses downtown? I mean, I guess.
Of course it would.
Huge, and I mean, you had said in the forum that your concern, yes, what's happened downtown has been really good, the revitalization. And it's interesting to see how much credit David Lovell wants to take. There's a lot of players at hand in that. But that's not the only part of Springfield. I don't live downtown. I rarely go downtown, and so we need to make sure that we're having a broader viewpoint, I guess. Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
On the most basic of levels, I divested myself of all my business interests. Actually, I retired before I ran for county commissioner. On the most basic of levels, there's a difference between one's private business interests or personal interests, the public interest, which is what county commissioners are supposed to represent, and conflicts of interest. And Lovell already has conflicts of interest. This is a guy who all his money, other than for the Washburn building, is California money that he's getting a small equity piece to be the property manager of those downtown buildings, which he participates in. Number one. Number two, I've had so many. I mean, at this point, it's probably a majority of his tenants unsolicitedly contact me and give me horror stories about the kind of property manager he is. But they don't want to have their names associated with it because apparently, and I didn't know this, he's also a pretty vengeful little guy. And as a result, they don't want to deal with retribution. So that's the most basic of levels. Number two, Lovell has gotten ceta subsidies for some of his investments. So he's already, dipped into the taxpayer public trough to purchase the buildings he's purchasing. Number three, he's actually had the city close him down because he was going ahead illegally with renovations before permits were acquired. So this is someone whose business practices I question as someone who's created exponentially more jobs and has had more successful business experience than he. But the other, there was another point. Oh, there's another point I was getting to. So that's the baseline. But the next point is, what's the vision? How many funds do you know? I know a bunch of them. Why does the ceta property? ceta owns 9 acres right on the river in Glenwood. The previous ceta group, before I came on the board, we're going to put an indoor track there, which was going to be a nonprofit for a few people, and would generate no revenues for the city. I was able to get an opportunity zone fund and one of the largest contractors in the state of Oregon, and a whole host of others, including a lot of local architects, right, engineers, etc. And they developed a $300 million proposal to put 600 units of housing with a hotel and a public park and public access to the river in that area. And believe it or not, the ceta board voted 5-3 against doing that. Had they voted for doing that, we would be seeing construction now. We'd be seeing the beginning of the building of 600 units, half of which would have been subsidized for working families and elderly. So ceta could be a bigger deal than it is right now, but that's what it's all about. And that's the problematic nature if my opponent does win. That's a structural issue right there.
You had mentioned, some of the people coming to you personally and telling you that him as a landlord has been atrocious. One of the things that's made headlines is that some of the properties that he manages and owns, he had implemented a no political signage policy. I remember reading about this, and it was obvious that the intention was to prevent, Black Lives Matter protesters or supporters to show their support by putting something in their window. And there was a bunch of backlash about this. And I do think that it's a difficult thing to navigate as far as how to, I don't think Black Lives Matter is a political slogan, but that's a different argument. But when it comes to no political signage policy in a business, it's difficult to navigate as a business owner or a property owner what the right move is, because there is property damage that has happened in Oregon, and things like that. But at the same time, it's not true that he wants no political signage policy, because if you go downtown, every inch that you look, there's David Lovell signs. So it's just hypocrisy at its finest.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
And then listening to what David Lovell said in the forum about how to deal with marginalized people was troubling to me, because he says, well, he's been to Africa and a bunch of there's a bunch of different countries doing missionary work, which is great. Nobody's knocking that, but you have to understand that not everybody that's a person of color is also struggling financially, or is living in this, third world reality. There's people that are thriving business wise that are still treated like lesser, and this is the whole problem of the systematic racism in our area. And so I just want to ask you how, marginalized people in our area feel unheard from, and what can be done to assure that they are heard from in future developmental projects.
Well, you covered a range of topics. I don't know how much time.
I know I kind of bounce around there.
That's okay. It was after apparently I'd been told that my opponent required a whole block of his tenants to take down their Black Lives Matter signs on their windows, which they're renting the property. It's their First Amendment right. During and after the Black Lives Matter protests that we had here in Springfield. And after that, I was told he rewrote everyone's leases so there's no opinion signage. And therein lies another conflict. If you know you're going to run for county commissioner, and you know most of your tenants are going to support your opponent, you preclude them from doing that, and then you drape your buildings with your own signs. This is sort of a classic example of the nonsense that I'm dealing with in this campaign, which makes it fundamentally different than my campaign 4 years ago. But as it relates to you're talking about racism, let's understand what racism is. It's methods of excluding people from participating in this or that. So the mechanisms of exclusion. So the way one deals with it is different. In county government, we have an equity initiative, and that equity initiative ensures that services get to populations that have been historically excluded. And we partner with different groups like Latino American, what is it? Central Latino Americano, with Eugene Springfield NAACP, with Catholic Community Services in the ARC, with a variety of groups. So that's in government, that's one way you do it. But in terms of the bigger economy, I've started doing that too in my community benefits agreement, which is now, because it's state law after we pioneered it in Lane County, not only has it generated over $60 million staying in the county that otherwise would have left just since I instituted it, because it prioritizes local spending, but it also prioritizes diverse workforce. It prioritizes health insurance for workers. It prioritizes retirement for workers. And the way that you deal in that environment, Patrick, with historical racism is you make sure people have work opportunities and paths to work opportunities, or paths to finance if it relates to banking. I mean, it depends on the situation because it's so pervasive. But all my life, I've worked for equal opportunity, and that's kind of the bottom line. Not bringing an African American from Africa here and parading him as your claim to caring about historically represented or underrepresented populations, and then him ending up on the streets, by the way.
I mean, and that was, I don't know. Like,
no.
He's homeless, there's nothing we can do.
I'm just going to focus on me, not him, because I consider him irrelevant, really. I truly do. But at the same time, this is going to be a very tight election because he's backed by people that want their seat back. Yeah.
And so, we've said enough about David Lovell, and I think you're right. Let's focus on your campaign, and then we're going to get some closing thoughts. One of the things that I've been noticing lately is just the widespread endorsements from a lot of the people in our community, both elected and just by citizens, just average Joes, no pun intended.
But I'm proud to be an average Joe.
Sure. But you've had support from Peter DeFazio. You've had support from Sean Van Gordon, the mayor of Springfield. Everyone on city council, is that correct? Is it every single person on city council except for maybe Joe Pish?
No, actually, that's not correct.
Okay.
I am supported, not endorsed. Half of the city council endorses me, but I'm supported by all but one city councilor who is choosing to remain neutral. And that's not who you mentioned.
No, really.
One of the things I take a lot of pride in is I'm not a fan of partisan politics, career politicians from either side of the aisle. I will work with everybody. And I think that all but one of the Springfield City Council, the majority endorsed by the majority of the Willamette Lane Park Board members, endorsed by the majority of the Springfield Public School Board members, endorsed by the majority of the Lane Community College Board members. It's a pretty broad swath of those that actually work in the community and know the work that I do.
Yeah. And your campaign has been really effective. It's so hard to tell how something's going because, there's, I'm hearing feedback now too. There is so much when you like somebody's Facebook profiles. Like I follow you on Facebook and I follow your campaign page and subscribe to the email. And so I see so much stuff. I wonder how much of it gets through to the people that aren't paying attention or don't follow you. It's so difficult to know. I do think you've been running go ahead.
No, I keep interrupting you, Patrick.
I was going to say, I do think that you're running a really good campaign. I do think, yes, today we were pointing out some of the things that you have absolute fundamental differences from your opponent. But I do think that it shows in your character what's important, and that's continuing the work that you've been doing, and so I'm excited I know you're going to win this. We'll see how it goes.
I do not know.
Yeah.
I do not know. I just got back here. You said you were going to mention this. The reason we had to change the time from a canvas where there were over 30 people, which was pretty gratifying, that are going out now and knocking on doors for me. My wife and I were not planning at this stage of our life to be doing this. I was never planning to ever run for office. I really believe that the real Springfield values, because my opponent keeps talking about, we're going to fight for Springfield. Well, guess what? We're not fighting for Springfield. We are advocating for the people that live in Springfield. And we're not fighting for the past. We're trying to create opportunities and resources and a livable future, now and moving forward. So again, Maddie and I weren't planning on doing this, but this is an interesting time in our country and our community's history. And I feel that it's a time where, I feel I exude Christian charity, right? I mean, last week I was at the baptism of my 8-month-old most recent granddaughter. Do I use that as a political thing? No. And I think most people in Springfield are that way. We want to live our lives. We care about other people more than we care about whether they're a Democrat or a Republican. We want our kids to be happy and get a decent education. We want there to be enough housing. We want to create hope and a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning for our young people. And you can't do that unless you have starter homes that they can start invest. I mean, you, Patrick, we've talked. You're fortunate enough to have gotten in before the insanity of the housing market. There's so much we can do. My track record has demonstrated that. So all Maddie and I can do is be honest, be transparent, be open, not allow the lies that our opponent is telling about us, a smear campaign, define what we're saying. And whether the voters are informed or not, their will be what determines this. I don't know which way it'll go, but I do know it's an honor to serve. And if we don't win, we'll get along with our life. I don't think that'll be good for our community. I don't think it'll be good for our county, but we'll survive. That's all we can do. Many of my campaign workers, do you have a minute to?
Yeah.
Many of my campaign workers have been so upset. They're younger people, by the lies, and just the dirtiness of the smear campaign that is being run against us. And here's what I tell them, and here's what I can say to anyone out there listening. You can't control what other people do. You can't control what other people say. All you can do is control your own behavior and your reaction to that, so you can sleep with yourself and be good with yourself every night. And so that's all we can do, and that's what we're doing.
So I was going to ask you closing thoughts, but I think you kind of just nailed it. I'm just going to ask one more thing, and this is the final stretch. So for all of the people that haven't voted yet, I'm going to remind everybody, May 17th is the last day to drop in your ballots. That's 10 days from now. You can do it now. You don't have to wait. I've already voted. I'm just waiting to drop it off. If you had that last reach for people that were undecided, what would you tell them directly to the voter on why Joe Berney is their candidate to continue to re-elect Joe Berney for Lane County Commissioner?
Well, it's the difference between competence and incompetence. It's the difference between genuinely caring about the public interest and thinking that your own business and private interests are going to take care of all problems, from poverty to racism to the environment. It's the difference between a commissioner that created a business-friendly, inclusive climate action plan at the county, and a would-be commissioner that believes all we need to do is leave climate action up to timber companies. And that's not a diss on timber companies. It's a diss on that sort of simplistic thinking. It's the difference, as you mentioned, Patrick, between a wellness first housing earned policy, which excludes people from shelter if they're having issues, and a fundamental difference in a housing first policy that says meet people where they are, provide them with shelter and basic human needs, and work with them to become independent and whole again. For all those and innumerable reasons, the difference is quite stark, actually.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that worries me the most about some of the options, David Lovell, and then I'm a big fan of Mark Molina, who's running for city council, and his opponent Victoria Doyle's. I just don't know if they're going to be as approachable. I have a great relationship with Mark, and you and I have built a good relationship behind the scenes. And I'm so different than the kind of person that gets involved in politics. I'm somebody that's rough around the edges. I really didn't pull my head out of my ass until like 6 years ago. And so it's really cool to be taken serious, even though I get a lot wrong. And I do want to say this. I have a correction from last week. I spoke out of turn. Thomas, Hira, and I just had fun kind of riffing about what's on the ballot. And I'm trying to learn. I want to bring entertainment to this podcast, but I also want to bring credibility. And so one of the things that I had said last week was I said that the Springfield Police Department donated to Victoria Doyle. That was wrong. It's the Springfield Police Union. And that would make much more sense. And I'm learning. And Sean Van Gordon and I had a conversation. And one of the things I'd like to do in the future is I'd like to sit down with the city manager, and I'd like to sit down with Sean Van Gordon, mayor, nonpartisan seats, really. And I want to learn more about the mechanics of government so that I can spotlight that on my podcast, so that I can show average people that don't know how this works, how it works, and which jobs are supposed to do what, because I know county commissioner has their role, the mayor has their role, and all these different things. So,
yeah. Yep. I mean, I can get into what the county does, but that's absolutely correct. Public school, pure opinion here. As an ex-teacher, public schools right now, there's no civics in public schools. No. It's going to be coming back, but that's what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And really, what schools young people leaving our schools need to have developed a work ethic, a service ethic, a citizenship ethic, which is what you're talking about, because you can't have that unless you understand how government works and the fact that people really are the source of any government credibility whatsoever. And ought to have kids that ought to learn to think for themselves and work with others. So, I think it's that simple. And I think that, Patrick, honestly, you can play a significant role in the civics education that now schools are having to re-engage with, and certainly in our community, whether formal or not, because
it's just so something. Cool. it's something I want to get right. And I
And
do, I
pulled
do
your
these,
head out of your ass.
yeah, yeah, I do these episodes, and I know that I speak sometimes out of turn and I say things that are inaccurate. And I just want people to understand that I'm just trying to do my part, and I'm learning and I'm educating myself on this, and everybody that's listening gets to witness my education of it. And I'm, there's some vulnerability that I'll put out there what I don't know. A lot of people don't want to admit what they don't know, but I know what I don't know. And
No,
that's a
you
lot.
don't. You don't know
Yeah,
what you do.
right. There's no knowns. No. Joe Berney, reelect Joe Berney for county commissioner. The ballots are on your table right now. People fill them out, put it in. One of the things about doing this live stream is I worry that by playing a song that it's going to it's gonna like it'll mute it because if it's copywritten. So unfortunately, that's going to be only a benefit that the audio users get to have. So I'm going to end it with a song after this. But Joe Berney, thank you so much. And so anyone listening, go to STRPOD.com and find out more about what's upcoming. I might be doing an episode next week, but the following week, I know I'm going to have Leonard Stare on, and we'll talk about a kind of a recap of the election. And I'd like to talk to him about how much has changed in Springfield now that there's so much more virtual stuff like this, and there's more people involved that were not actually in the conversation before, and how it looks different. So that'll be an interesting conversation. Joe Berney, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Get back out in the rain and knock on more doors.
Thanks very much, Patrick.
Yeah, you have a good day.
You too.
Now I'm going to end this with